Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest edition of Read TFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Humans Welcome, written by Graith. The sign up front transmitted its message into several hundred languages as diverse as the chittering of the owlry to the chemical exchange that somehow functioned as a sort of pseudo-language for the Peenti. But whatever language it transmitted in, it seemed to receive a strange response. Humanity welcome, it said. A floating sign carefully positioned at the most likely entrance to the ship dock center that served this remote lane of intergalactic travel. It stood out because of the fact that humans, unlike most of the well-established species in the intergalactic Senate, were usually seen as nuisances. They were the newest species to enter the Senate, and a great deal of fuss had been made attempting to keep them out. No new species had entered in so long that only the rarest, longest-living species had any record of when it had last happened, a time that equated to perhaps 230 to 240,000 solar years earlier. And unlike that species, humans had not simply shown up from far away, already advanced, already cultured, and developed and accustomed to interspecies communication. No, the humans had shown up unable to communicate, wasting decades of other species' time trying to establish themselves in the intergalactic markets, only to find that they lacked the majority of skills and technology that would be viewed as useful. A fair number became part of the entertainment market. Humans, of course, having a talent with storytelling in nearly any format. But they were generally treated as a subgroup, less than worthy. So to find that a shop allowing humans access to a main ship dock was rare, but to find one that actively welcomed them, it had actually driven away more than a few customers, and the fact that it had the capacity to do so was astonishingly informative about how seriously other species took the oppression and insults they threw in the direction of the humans. After all, to be driven away from a ship dock, driven the sheer distance, adding in the waste of time and energy, and the potential for whatever had driven them to the dock in the first place, getting worse or causing trouble before the nearest, more agreeable dock could be located. It was a shock. Still, it was true. More true, though, was the fact that it was a deliberate choice to invite in humanity. The Pluyan who ran the shop had a strange liking for humans. A liking his daughter found to be one of the greatest flaws in her father's entire world outlook. Her father, the ship dock owner, was named something that didn't translate well. Perhaps because Pluyans used poetry that lost most of the meaning in defining their own names, or perhaps simply because he preferred to go by a nickname, and therefore tended not to respond quickly when people called him by his actual name. Whatever the reason, the name they called him translated into human speech phonetically close to pop, both for the popping sound his name made when pronounced in his own Pluyan tongue, and in a strange chance occurrence, because he was literally called Pop or Pops by his daughter, who helped run his ship dock center out here in the intergalactic edges in an effort to seem relaxed and friendly, using nicknames, and being calm instead of the formal sort of way most other species saw her kind. Dua, Enil, and Oi Uord, or as others were glad to call her, more simply, Uord, pronounced U-Ord, or U-Odd, was currently complaining angrily at her father as another ship took off without repairs or a spot check. After seeing the sign, the little white ship had sent a rude signal to their comms unit and flown away, obviously offended at the thought that their ship might be repaired by anything that could contact a human vessel. But because it left and wasn't repaired or spot checked, that meant the dock wasn't going to see even a partial credit for their labors today. These were the daily little processes by which the ship dock's automated scanning and repair operations made its owner their living. And yet, once again, the thrice-damned sign had rejected the annoying human-friendly message that had forced potential customers away. U-Ord strode behind her father, yelling into the comms unit in his exposure suit. About every human ship that we've seen together wouldn't make up for the money lost in the half year relative to their current orbital position of the lost ship commerce. She repeated herself, changing the words but not the message, and stormed after Pop as he launched himself in his exposure suit out to where the ship had taken off, and begun the repetitive, calming process of using a laser cleaner to cleanse the angrily launched ship's liftoff stains from the launch pad. Waving the little tool back and forth, each pass cleaning another microscopic layer of carbonized material off the pad's surface. Pop listened to Uord's annoyance, but kept a pleasant and unassuming smile on his face, or more accurate, the mandible expression. That his species was most closely analogous to such a human expression. He didn't seem bothered by the lost customer. He knew there were massive loads of ore and refinery runners coming from the retreating nebula cluster half the system off, and of late that had led him to a fairly consistent, if not always terribly agreeable employment. Even as Uord moved on to her newest gripe. You could take down the sign anyhow. I mean, the humans would still come. We wouldn't prevent them. There's no reason to have the sign. It just upsets the rest of the species. A small, metallic sheen ship was popping into visible space overhead and slowly dropping down into near-dock space, where the dock's automated touchdown sensors would guide the ship safely to the nearest clear landing pad, which of course could be any pad at all, given the lack of other customers at present. And to make Uart angrier, it was, in fact, a human ship. These were always obvious from their strange designs, aesthetically unpleasant forms designed for pure function, the result of humanity's inability to transcend such necessity due to their still limited knowledge. As it landed, it hailed the proprietor of the dock, sending a quick message of appreciation to find a haven site so far out the near-human systems. Haven sites were the human term for those fortunate locations that allowed human vessels assistance or even temporary acceptance, rare enough in the outer galactic space they now inhabited. Pop responded with a normal answer, "No thanks needed, young ones," when the slip dock's automated system started quizzing the humans about which services they'd need. Uord finally shut up. Of course, she hadn't been transmitting her communications to the human ship, so they didn't know that she'd been ranting most of this while. But Pops finally got the moment of blessed silence, in which he too stared at the display in his exposure suit, which explained Uord's silence. They wanted repair service, access to oxygen-laden living environment for the equivalent of 3 to 5 human days, depending on service time, and most expensively and interestingly, they requested assistance for medical assistance and emergency response for 2 of the crew aboard their ship. Even before the credits cleared the system, Pop had told the computer to permit the humans permissions, which resulted in several dozen automated responses within the dock to occur. First, hundreds of almost invisible small bots were released into the thin atmosphere surrounding the human ship. The bots being the dock's method of scanning and beginning minute repairs down to the near atomic level of detail. But more interestingly was the larger set of robotic creatures sprinting from a hatch at the base of the dock's massive external wall. These large robotic figures carried several opaque, bubble-like items in their appendages and rapidly ran to the human ship, screening the airlock from sight and retreating moments later. The humans had offloaded whatever 2 of their number were injured into the pods, which would now head to the dock's innermost and most complex systems, where the medical data and every currently well-known sentient species in the galaxy was stored. The dock would almost definitely save them, but it was a rare feature of the dock. It cost an unbelievable amount, not only because of the difficulty in keeping the necessary equipment on hand to handle medical care for so many diverse species with diverse needs, but because access to the database of information required for the medical data was a costly purchase in itself. Most ship dock systems simply didn't enable the feature, but Pop did, if only because he was so far away from other docks and didn't like the feeling of being responsible if his dock were to fail and ultimately kill someone. While that excitement continued, Uord chased the retreating robots back towards the dock door and inside. Pop knew that she would try to ensure that the humans had only included the 2 wounded, not more, trying to get cheaper medical care. In her strange bias against humans, somehow completely ignoring the fact that the system would have registered more than 2 creatures in the rescue pods if they'd been placed there. Pop, however, turned to stare at the ship, as a stream of perhaps a dozen humans exited in their own primitive-looking and surprisingly unwieldy exposure suits. Knowing enough of human behavior to wave them over, Pop led the silent group towards the top level of the dock, where different living environments could be generated by a system in accordance with the selected needs. As the humans had selected an environment similar to the home world, even now, the dock had prepared space for them in a 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, and 1% diffuse inert gas environment, which Pop knew was really just the dock's way of rationalizing the occasional argon, helium, or methane slow leak between occupation pods. He talked briefly as he showed the humans to their chambers, but they couldn't talk back. Their suits could talk to the ship computer or one another, but didn't know how to automatically patch into Pop's own comms unit. Even if the comms unit could automatically patch into theirs, it wasn't until they were inside, disrobed out of their exposure suits, and were doing a whole mess of strange human gestures like bowing and extending their thumbs upwards, all towards Pop, whose own body could endure the strange atmosphere without much ill effect, suit or not. Then he understood the reality of the humans' arrival. The story quickly came out, with the exhausted-looking humans happily sharing the tale with the strange dock owner, who not only allowed them access to his machines, but seemed to want to make it clear, with that transmission sign over the dock entrance, that he accepted humanity. They told him that they had been in the same nebula system he knew nearly every race had sent at least some portion of -2, and they had run across a damaged ship. 4 aliens. They admitted they didn't know what sort, and their ship's data didn't contain the species database to guide them in their discovery. Had been alive on the ship, which was ignored by passing transport ships, even as the humans boarded. No one was stopping, as the injured ship appeared to be the only one of its kind in the area, and the other ships were ignoring the distress signal, not recognizing the ship as one of their own. Pop, in his own way, understood. The nebula was an enormous distance to travel to, requiring a great investment, and the ships would only have limited space, stopping to collect an unknown species that might be injured themselves, taking up space in their own ships. All to help someone else who was in fact a competitor in this nebula mining operation was simply not a smart choice. Harsh or not, it was better to let them die. And perhaps then, once your ship confirmed no life aboard the now empty ship, check their holds for supplies. Then, and only then, maybe you'd consider doing the polite thing and sending the ship's signal to let its homeworld know that it was still out here, with no crew, so no one would be waiting uncertainly at home. Even that wasn't always guaranteed, since it might result in a signal coming back requesting you to tow the ship back, or demanding evidence that you hadn't caused whatever had destroyed the ship itself, which might lead to a legal battle and complicated mess. The long story short, the wisest thing to do was to leave injured ships and accept that as one of the risks out here in the outer reaches. But the humans hadn't done so. They'd gone on to the injured ship, analyzed the atmosphere on board and foodstuffs, trying to make sure that they could partition off a small section of their own vessel and recreate that environment as closely as possible. Then they'd offload the now only 3 living aliens. One died almost as soon as the humans boarded, into their own ship, and sprinted to the nearest dock center. It hadn't been Pop's dock. The first they'd come to had sent them off, even after they'd offered to just drop the aliens off and cover their medicals, never letting a single human off the ship at the dock itself. The owner's response had been to warn them that they could leave now or be blown to molecular bits, and they'd headed for the next dock, which was less aggressive, but didn't have medical enabled on his ship dock system. Luckily, that dock owner, Pop had an idea that it might be the dock in the next half sector over, had suggested that if they were in need of a haven dock, a human-friendly one with full medical, they could come here. And although the 3rd alien that the humans had rescued had passed in the hour or so before they landed here, the 2 remaining members of the alien crew were obviously going to be fine now, seeing as this was a medical-enabled dock. Pop let his mandibles twist into what he knew most humans saw as a sort of mimic of smiling. In his own people, the look was one of extreme disgust, but he knew that humans seemed to like the smiling mandible face, and so he supplied it. As he told them that he was glad to have them, Dean was impressed at their story. The humans waved his compliments aside, asking only whether their credit was enough for a full 5-day stay, the duration it would take to get the injured aliens back on board their ship to bring them home, or whether it would only last a 3-day stay, the duration required for a full ship scan and repair process. Pop told him not to worry, the credits were more than enough. And once he noticed one of the older-looking humans yawning in the back of the little cluster, he excused himself, suggesting they get some rest while his doc saw to their ship and prepared whatever nutritional items they might need. They thanked him profusely, acting as though he were doing them some kind of favor to let them pay an extravagant price to save 2 creatures they had no ties to, no obligations to protect. He was, as he always seemed to be, amused and a bit touched at the way the young species seemed to connect at an emotional level with every other creature they passed. However strange and even potentially aggressive. By the time he had navigated down to the medical quarters, finding Uord watching as 2 aliens were cared for. On sight, both she and Pop knew immediately that they were Lulpans, one of the 3 species recently charged with human hunting, a revolting pastime that involved capturing and raising infant humans for eventual sport hunting. Pop was tempted, in that moment, to turn the doc's medical system off, but decided that if the humans had told of the actions of the other Lulpans and made the decision, then only then would he do so. It was, after all, their money paying for this care. He was lost in these thoughts as Uord turned to him and met his gaze with an irritated intensity. Even as the first words spilled forth from her, he knew she was angry. "You left your comms on, you know." She was referring not to his suit's comms unit, but the one every dock owner had implanted near whatever they used for communication, which in his case was his thickly mandibled mouth. It could be mentally controlled to a limited degree, allowing dock owners to communicate with employees in crisis, and was one of the aspects of his ship stock system he used the least often. Pop didn't argue. He'd done so, and he'd done so on purpose. Uord continued. "I can't turn off the dock comms, you know. I couldn't even mute your stupid discussion. It's pretty rude trying to manipulate me." Again, Pop didn't respond. He felt she wasn't finished yet, and after a brief moment's silence, he was proven right. "But yeah, I heard, and apparently those idiots upstairs don't even know a Leplin when they see one. If they knew, I bet they wouldn't have been so high and mighty, huh? Wouldn't have tried to play the hero like that. I mean, you know why they saved him, don't you? A human miner isn't going to carry away anything too valuable, but saving an injured ship, you stand a chance at a reward for that. 10 times as much as a miner would have made out in the nebula. Don't pretend they're just being altruistic, no matter what they say." Pop responded, now with a counterpoint. "And when they offered to drop the Lulpans off at the first dock, pay their medical costs, but leave themselves, how would they make money off that then?" Uord paused to think, and then answered. "We only have their word on that. They might have been spinning your story so you'd feel bad. Cut them a deal on the dock work." Pop answered her accusation again, rather slowly. "True, possible. But, well, I don't think so. I mean, I bet there are humans who do so. Every people in the galaxy has a few swindlers in their ranks, but I still don't think that's what happened. I think they told us the truth." Uord narrowed her eye slits, and her irritation manifested with a strange color change showing on her mandibles, the reddish yellow of annoyance mixed with shame. "And even if they did, you didn't have to link the comms on me. I didn't need that, you know. I get it, okay? You like humans. Maybe they're not bad. It doesn't mean that we should lose money trying to be their friends, or anything." Pop thought about that, with 100 responses he'd originally used to argue with Uord after she first protested his putting the pro-human sign over the ship dock entrance. But he decided on another strategy. "Fine, maybe so. But you're going to go up there and tell the humans that they saved a couple of Lulpan, and that we understand they didn't know what they were doing, and are willing to not charge them for the medical expenses if they agree to have the medical care shut down now, before the most expensive regrowth processes are started." Uord glared at him, and as she pushed past, he knew that she would probably hate him even more if the humans did decide to shut off the medical treatments. If they did, Uord would feel responsible, and her hatred for the humans would grow instead of diminishing. But Pop needn't have worried. A crew that had risked their fortunes to save unknown aliens in the nebula weren't about to make their efforts seem wasted. And as the oldest of the human crewmen pointed out, it wasn't fair to hold these Lalpen responsible for the actions of others. These were just victims of circumstance. Wouldn't they, the human crew, want other species to save them in the same situation? If they needed help, wouldn't they want to have other ships look past their species and just offer aid, regardless of their humanity? This quiet discussion in the human pod at the top of the dock would have been impossible to hear for Pop if Ord hadn't left her own comms on, perhaps in response to his earlier manipulations, throughout the whole process. And by the time Ord returned, you could tell from her muttering to herself in her own comm system that she was riled up, annoyed, and confused all at once. She passed on the human's decision, acting as if she hadn't let Pop in on the whole discussion, then retreated to her own room, letting the dock run its various autonomous processes without oversight. For the rest of the day, and for nearly all of Pop's interactions with the humans or the other customers who came in for brief scans and headed out, Ord stayed silent. 5 days later, when the humans met the Lulpans, who reacted first with disgust and irritation, then shame, and finally appreciation at their saviors, Ord stayed silent. It wasn't until the human ship's captain thanked Pops for his dock and his hospitality that Ord spoke to the humans again. And Pop was flushed with pride, practically exploding with it, when she said, "No, sir. Thank you. We waived the medical fees this morning. We're not going to charge you for being kind to those Lulpans. I mean," she pointed at the Lulpans, who were uneasily and still rather uncomfortably walking towards the human ship, apparently not sure what to make of their strange saviors. The captain thanked her profusely, and offered at least a small number of credits to show his appreciation, but Pop cut in, saving Yuan from the pain that he knew that she must be feeling, having turned down good money that the dock had earned, fair and square. Instead, Pop thanked the captain and gave him a little pat on the head, which he quickly realized might not mean the same thing to adult humans. That his interactions watching adults interacting with human children might lead him to believe. Still, the human took the strange head pats with relative dignity and thanked them again before heading for his ship. After they were airborne and soon leaving atmosphere, Pop turned to Ord. "You did a good thing there. I approve of it, waiving the charges. Let us hope those Lulpans and any other of their sort that they know feel as changed as you do." Ord's voice was defensive and perhaps a touch petulant as she faced her father and snapped, "That didn't change. I'm just not going to make them pay for something they obviously can't afford. Did you scan their ship data? If we charged them what they owed us, they wouldn't have had enough credits to leave their ship parked overnight anywhere, much less rooms and food." Pop wanted to point out that even that display of kindness was an obvious sign of change. He'd seen it before, in others. That strange compassion that seemed to rub off humans like a disease, or perhaps more positively, an aura they spread wherever they attended. But Pop knew better than to tease her, especially now that she was obviously annoyed at herself for having changed so very obviously and confirming Pop's previous suspicion. They headed inside and Pop let Ord handle the next several customers, including a ship of his own species that docked and requested a week's stay and respite. But he couldn't help from laughing, forgetting that he'd left his comms unit on when the recently landed ship's captain said, "An awfully funny sign you got there. Wouldn't expect you to let the lessers being sully your dock. A self-respecting lady like you." And Ord replied, her voice filled with exasperation and unsuppressed irritation at the role she now somehow found herself in. "The sign says, 'Humans welcome,' doesn't say a damn thing about you lot, so don't tempt me." End of story. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Vidmori, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.